Today, we're going to be diving into the GTX 1650 Super, a standout budget card from 2019, which has about 31% performance boost over the regular GTX 1650 while maintaining that 4 gigabytes of VRAM. But with 2024 here, is this card still a contender for our budget gamers? We'll put this card through our fast-paced shooters and see if its 4 gigabytes of VRAM is holding it back. Plus, we'll also test this one in our 1440p resolutions on our lighter games. And just for the fun of it, we'll also put this against the most popular card from our Steam hardware surveys, the RTX 3060, to see if an upgrade is really worth it. Let's find out if the GTX 1650 Super still packs punch. Let's dive into Warzone first. We've set the VRAM limitation to 50% and are running competitive settings to push the GTX 1650 Super. At native 1080p, the card delivers respectable 80 FPS with VRAM usage under 3 gigabytes. While we're hitting the GPU bottlenecks here, and performance isn't stellar, it's still above 60 FPS even during tougher moments. Now, let's see how enabling FSR 3 impacts the performance of the GTX 1650 Super. With FSR 3 turned on, we get a noticeable boost in FPS and fewer micro stutters, making the game feel slightly smoother. In-game, the GTX 1650 Super continues to be GPU bottleneck, with FPS hovering around 80 and dipping into the high 60s during more intense scenes. Frame times aren't perfect, but they're better than what you would expect for a budget card. Even in the gulag with smokes and all the chaos, FPS stays around 80 and you can still land your shots. Overall, while not perfectly smooth in Warzone, the experience is surprisingly solid for a budget card with no major stutters to ruin the fun. Apex Legends performs quite well on the GTX 1650 Super. In less demanding areas, we're enjoying smooth gameplay with around 180 FPS. However, as the action heats up with intense scenes like smokes and explosions, FPS does drop down to 150 or even 110. Frame times are impressively consistent, making for a smooth experience overall. With VRAM usage just over 3.2 gigabytes at low texture settings, the card handles the game well. That's it. During the final circle, with lots of players and fakes, FPS can occasionally dip below 100. The GTX 1650 Super delivers a decent performance in Apex Legends while occasionally struggling with some drops in FPS during intense scenes, but it generally provides a playable experience, so that is okay. Let's move on to our games which require a lot of FPS. First up is Fortnite, a game that thrives on high FPS. For those who are new to the channel, Fortnite supports multiple APIs, so let's see how the GTX 1650 Super performs across all three APIs. And right away, it's clear that the DX11 is the most demanding of all APIs. Across the board, GPU usage is high, and for the best stability and raw FPS, performance mode is the way to go with the GTX 1650 Super if you're aiming for competitive play. In actual gameplay, the card handles build fights quite well, delivering around 300 FPS with lows around 150. While occasional stutters are present, this is common in Fortnite and likely related to server issues or maybe the anti-cheat rather than the card itself. With 95% GPU usage and only 1.7 gigabytes of VRAM in performance mode, the GTX 1650 Super proves to be a solid budget option for competitive Fortnite. Valorant is another title that benefits from high FPS, and the GTX 1650 Super performs admirably here. At 1080p with competitive settings, the card handles the game effortlessly. Since Valorant isn't particularly demanding on the GPU, the GTX 1650 Super isn't bottlenecked and easily achieves around 500 FPS. For those new to the channel, we've disabled the lows metrics here because it can be skewed by the buy screen or abilities like Omen's Shadow Realm. Overall, the GTX 1650 Super delivers impressive performance in Valorant, making it a solid choice for this game. Let's see how the GTX 1650 Super fares when we bump these lighter games to 1440p later on. Moving back to our games which demand more graphics, we have PUBG, and we are running DX11 Enhanced API, and once again we are bottlenecked by the GTX 1650 Super here. 96% on our GPU utilization, moving around the map, and we are able to pull about 110 FPS here with lows at about 80. VRAM usage is about 3.2 gigabytes with our competitive settings, and walking around urban areas, we are getting about the same vibe. Our FPS is between 100 to 130. This is actually not bad, and I think it's okay. It's definitely good enough if you're on a budget. Next up is Helldivers 2, and here we have Helldivers 2 running on medium settings at 1080p. It's not that great. Our FPS is lower than 60, and we are still on the training area. So let's drop the settings down to low, and here's the difference between the two. That's a huge bump in terms of FPS using low settings, and check out the VRAM usage of the two settings. Those are nearly maxing out our 4 GB VRAM. In a real world environment on low settings, this one initially started okay, getting about 60 FPS when we are swarmed by the terminid scums. However, as you go along, you will notice that there will be frame time spikes, and this is because we may have exceeded the VRAM capacity of our GTX 1650 Super, which causes this stutter. And so, I guess we'll have to drop the settings even lower for Helldivers 2. Here we have lowered the settings and added ultra quality upscaling to decrease the VRAM demand. And it did decrease the demand on this occasion, bringing it down to 3.6 gigabyte. With this, we are now able to reach slightly higher FPS on our heavier action scenes and push for higher lows too. No more stutters, and our GPU utilization is definitely maxed out in this guy. And this is why the 4 gigabyte VRAM is definitely sort of like obsolete in 2024. Newer games like this one will eventually use more VRAM even if we set it to lower settings. So knowing that, my question would be, what VRAM will you be targeting on your next GPU purchase? Feel free to let me know on the comments section down below. Okay, let's move on. In this spot, let's compare the GTX 1650 Super against a more powerful card, the RTX 3060 12GB. If you're considering an upgrade, here's what you can expect to gain. In Warzone, the RTX 3060 12GB shows a significant advantage, nearly doubling the FPS and offering a much more smoother experience with fewer micro stutters. So if you're into Warzone, upgrading to the RTX 3060 12GB is definitely a clear win over the GTX 1650 Super. Moving on to Helldivers 2, the story is much the same. The RTX 3060 12GB again delivers almost double the FPS across various benchmarks, including the standard running, shooting, and stratagem testing. It's a substantial upgrade if you're looking for better performance. Likewise, for PUBG, we are continuing with the trend here. The RTX 3060 12GB is definitely a worthy upgrade. While it doesn't have as much lead when compared to the other games during the running benchmark, the RTX 3060 pulls through during our heavier benchmark scene like this one. For our lighter games, Fortnite's performance mode doesn't seem to have much of a gain as compared to the previous games. We did get some FPS here, however the lows remain very close to each other. Moving on to DX12 API, and it seems like the gap between these two does become more apparent. For Fortnite, it's not much of a difference for performance mode. You can probably save some dollars if you're just playing Fortnite rather than paying premium for very minimal gains. Similarly, with Valorant shows modest gains with the RTX 3060 12GB. And although you'll see better maximum FPS and improved lows in heavier benchmark, the difference in lighter scenarios are less significant. The RTX 3060 12GB remains a solid upgrade, but may not provide a substantial boost in games like Valorant compared to our more demanding titles. If you're looking for a major performance increase across a range of demanding games, the RTX 3060 12GB is a strong choice. However, for lighter games, or if you're budget conscious, the GTX 1650 Super still offers respectable performance. Okay, let's see how the GTX 1650 Super performs at 1440p compared to 1080p, focusing only on our lighter games like Fortnite and Valorant. So this is very important if you're aiming for that extra bit of clarity given by the higher resolution. Starting with Fortnite in performance mode, the difference between 1080p and 1440p is noticeable. While you won't hit the 300 FPS mark at 1440p, the performance remains decent and playable. VRAM usage stays manageable as well, using just about 1.8 gigabyte even at the higher resolution. And Valorant, the difference between resolutions is more pronounced. The 1080p settings deliver higher raw FPS, but the 1440p performance still holds up well with a tight spread of frame rates. While you'll see lower FPS numbers compared to 1080p, the 1440p resolution still provides a good gaming experience. Overall, the GTX 1650 Super can handle 1440p in these lighter games reasonably well, offering a viable option if you prefer a higher resolution without sacrificing too much of your performance. The GTX 1650 Super is definitely still a strong budget card even in 2024. Sure, it does have its dreaded 4GB VRAM limitation. However, we can circumvent this by lowering our settings, and on games wherein it's really bottlenecked by the capacity of our VRAM, try to lower it some more. I think this is a solid option for budget gamers who are coming from maybe integrated graphics or even a really entry-level card. The GTX 1650 Super is definitely a good choice for you. And if you're interested in reviews like these, subscribe to the channel, guys. Okay, that's it. I'll see you guys in the next video.